Bismillah. Okay, inshallah, I think 5 minutes is good enough, and small groups are perfectly fine for these kinds of things, inshallah. Welcome to another episode of Lisān Lab, the unofficial podcast of the Mashraba community, as I keep joking. But in all seriousness, I like to usually just start by kind of reminding everyone, or like reiterating the purpose of these sessions. It was a blessing for me to find the Mashraba community, I think, because we're all very like-minded individuals, and I think there's a movement within the group towards a different kind of learning and a different kind of approach to tradition and knowledge and all that stuff. So at its very simplest core, Lisān Lab, or however you want to think of these sessions, it's really just about recording good conversations. I'm sure anybody can relate to when you feel passionate about something, any subject, whatever it is, whenever you talk about that, you end up having good conversations with people. Mashallah, many of us are very passionate about language and our faith and philosophy and knowledge and all of these kinds of things. So, I think beautiful conversations can come out of that. More technically, I've started to think of these sessions as like a semiotics laboratory. Lisān Lab, Lisān being the Arabic word for tongue, but also for vernacular, right? The way we speak. And semiotics is kind of like semantics, kind of like linguistics, but it's more focused on like how meaning is formed. So, in these sessions, we ask like really very basic questions. We look at roots and we look at morphology and we look at Quran and some other things. But sorry, I got distracted by the chat message. Thank you for that message, Smat. I only have one screen right now, so I miss some of the chat messages sometimes. So if I don't notice something, that's the first time I feel like it made a noise when somebody sent a message. Usually I feel like there's no noise. Anyway, where was I? So Lisān Lab, recording good conversations, semiotic laboratory, understanding meaning, asking very basic questions, right? Like, how do we know that this is a thing? How do we know that like power is a thing, or strength is a thing, or mercy is a thing? How does the mind really ground these things in reality? So that's kind of the main goal in these sessions. And the format, like I said, is pretty simple. We start off with basic questions, and usually we just look at the root or the form of the word or the linguistic piece in question. And we switched that up a little bit last time, and I think even once before that. I think Joshua was with us, and his first thought was about the anagram, I think, of al-Malik, right? The root for Malik. So that's another avenue that we can take, right? Looking at the root, looking at the form, looking at anagrams of the root, looking at usage examples in the Quran or Hadith or poetry. Those are all viable ways to kind of dissect meaning and dive deep into like a single idea. And I'm actually curious if there's any feedback, you guys think about it maybe, and sorry, I keep hearing noises from the Google Meet, and I don't know what it means. Is there someone trying to get in here? Anyway, sorry. Sorry, I lost my train of thought again. I'm recovering from a little bit of a sinus infection, so you'll have to excuse me a little bit if I'm a little slow. But I think last time we started with the form instead of the root. And I think another time before that I was saying when Joshua came in, his first thought was the anagram. So we started with that. So we can kind of flip it around and however, I'm looking for feedback actually. If anybody thinks, I'm starting to think that maybe starting with the form is actually maybe better, and then we kind of end with the root or maybe with anagrams. But I think it can be flexible. In the last case, I think it was useful to start with the form because we did two words or two names of Allah, both of which come from the same root, and both of which have very similar morphological forms, one being the more intensive of the other. I think again we can start with the form here today, just because it's a form that we've come across before, so we don't need to spend too much time on it. And in general, the way I kind of look at these sessions and a lot of my research and language in general is that, there's kind of a parallel between the root of a word and the form of the word and language in general. Language, for me, in a lot of ways, is like a mirror of the self. Sorry, it looks like there was something wrong with the group and it wasn't letting people in. Okay, I think that should be okay now. Oh, this is tricky on your own, managing. I keep losing my chain of thought. Where was I?
Do you want to make me co-host? I can help manage the room while you just go into the teaching.
I would love that. Is there a way to do that in Google? Maybe I should. I've been thinking of. I don't think so. Yeah.
If you click on my name if you click on there's three dots next to my name, there might be an opportunity.
No, it doesn't. I guess maybe I should switch to Zoom. I was thinking about doing that actually. Google is just convenient, but khair inshallah.
Well, about after, inshallah, but you can do.
Yeah. Sorry, does anyone remember what I was saying? I think I.
Talking about the root and the form and what anagram and different aspects.
Oh. Yes, thank you. There was something else that I was trying to say, but inshallah, it'll come back to me. So I think we can start here with the form because it's a familiar form that we've come across before, and that we came across. This is a very common form. Aziz has the form of a very common word that we hear a lot, Habib, right? So it's the wazn in Arabic, fa'il, if you're curious about Arabic morphological terminology. It's also the same form as Rahim. And we got into a little bit of a discussion about this last week, actually, even though none of those forms were directly relevant. But it's because that form is very flexible in the Arabic language. A lot of words and a lot of forms in Arabic are very flexible, but that one in particular can often have the meaning of a doer, somebody who's doing something, or it can have the opposite meaning, or not really opposite, but the meaning of something being done. So an active participle or a passive participle. Sometimes that doesn't work, and then there's some debate sometimes on certain words. For example, Rahim we talked about a little bit. There's some debate whether is it a noun of a subject, or is it a noun describing the state of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And it's not it's a technical debate, not super important. But what is, I think, important is just recognizing the flexibility of the form. And then I cited this one example of what I'm trying to say in a quote by Ibn al-Arabi, right, where he says famously, I think he was appointed some sort of official status or something like that, and he says, رُبَّ حَبِيبٍ نَاصِحٍ غَيْرُ مَحْبُوب, which means, he said that afterwards. Initially he said, أَنَا حَبِيبُكُمْ, I am your Habib, right, I'm your lover, right, أَيْ مُحِبُّكُمْ, but but he's being technical and he's saying, but I mean it in the meaning in the sense of an active participle, not in the sense of a descriptor or a passive participle. Because usually when you say Habib, usually it means beloved, right? It means the person who receives the action, not the person who's doing the action. So Ibn al-Arabi here, he's being kind of like intellectual, and he's saying, I'm the one who loves you. Not you guys don't really appreciate me or love me or yeah, to that effect. And then he wrote like a line of poetry saying, "Rubba habibin nasih ghayru mahbub." How often is it that there is a lover whose love is unrequited, or his love is not returned? So yeah, that's some notes on the form there. I think what I wanted to say before actually was just kind of open it up to the group if anybody had any thoughts or anything they want to share, or even anything from last session as well. Yeah. And if anything comes to mind, feel free to bring it up at any point in time. I always try to emphasize that this isn't like a class of any sort. I don't really think I'm an expert at any of these subjects, morphology or grammar or linguistics or philosophy. It's just I'm passionate about these subjects, and I think good conversations can come from that. Yeah, sure.
Aziz, or rather just Aziz. I know in Urdu we have the word dear or something to us, but is there in Arabic, are there multiple other meanings that modify the word something? If we just leave it as it is, are there any opposing meanings or distant from each other?
Yeah.
Aziz means command, and Allah means, and Aziz also means dear. Are there additional ones?
Well, let's hold that thought up for a second, but it does bring me to something that I was trying to say before, I think, which is the relationship between Habib and Aziz. Really, in Arabic, it's not as common, but we say Azizi, like the same way we say Habibi, right? There's even some poetry of the Prophet. We say, Ya Azizi, ya Rasulullah, or Ya Habibi, ya Rasulullah. They're very, very interchangeable. But there's a question there, and I kind of want everyone to maybe just keep it in the back of your mind to think about it until we kind of get to the root and look at some related words. But why is that, right? Like, so Habibi is the passive form, right? It's most commonly the passive form, except in the case of Ibn al-Arabi in that one quote. So it usually means the one who is receiving the love, the receiver of the action. And the root word for Habibi or Hub, we know is love, right? So, it makes sense. In this case, though, the basic meaning of Aziz, as Lane has here, is this mighty, strong, powerful, and most of us, are already familiar with that. So just kind of a thought to keep in the back of your head of like, well, why is that? Why is it that, we use Aziz like Habib, to as a term of endearment, when it has this idea of like mighty, potent, strong, that sort of thing. So I think that's enough form stuff. I always kind of forget like little tidbits of morphology and linguistics that are interesting, so I'll probably throw those in the chat if they come to me later. Yeah, I think we can just kind of jump into the root here. So, inshallah, I keep saying this, but inshallah there will be a feature here where as soon as you click on the root, you will see the main word that I think is like the key to understanding the root, or the one word that kind of ties everything all together. But for now, we'll just kind of have to go through it together, inshallah.
And just so everybody knows, if people are joining for the first time, this is an app that Brother Omar has visualizing the structure of the Arabic language. So it's a very unique opportunity that we have to be able to be journeying with him as he continues to develop that.
Jazakallah khair, Joshua. Yeah, it's something that I built over the summer, and I can always go into it in more detail if anybody is interested. Just a quick side note here. I think I mentioned before about how we're all very like-minded individuals and looking for kind of a different way to approach knowledge and learning and all that. And one of the things that really has struck me recently, a couple months ago in a Jummah khutbah, one of my good friends, he was giving a khutbah about how in the modern world we're really oversaturated and over inundated with words. Just really within the span of like the last 50 years, we consume more words than like 90% or something like that. I forget the exact number that he gave, but it was very high. It was definitely over like 70% more words than people did like 50 years ago, right? So like all that information overload is just like, it's a lot, right? So that's one of the goals with these sessions too, is really just to kind of like get right into it, just start talking about ideas and see where they take us. So the key word I think in this case here is azaz. But before we look at that, we can kind of look at some of the other words here. The color coding is not super great. I might improve it at some point, but there's a little key here. Basically, phrases are the lightest color, and then verbs are a little bit darker, and nouns are the darkest. So the basic meaning of the verb, which often helps to understand, is just to like make something more powerful, or make something, for something to become powerful or potent. So it doesn't really clue us much into the meaning of the word, because it's really kind of just reiterating the same idea. And I think there was somebody mentioned Aziz in the group chat, right? Surah Yusuf, Aziz is mentioned, right? And Aziz is kind of usually translated as like the minister or the president or the king of some sort, and that's common in the Arabic language. There's actually also another name of Allah that comes from this root as well. So we'll get to that, at some point, inshallah. I think it's maybe in the 50s or 40s or something like that, and that's al-Mu'izz. And that would mean the person who grants, right? So that's the active participle form, like we did last week with mu'min. So it's the one who gives izzah. So the key word I think for me is azaz. So the meaning of azaz is hard ground, hard or rugged ground. I think in another, in which nothing grows from this land really, but it's rain. Like if rain hits it, it just it flows quickly. It doesn't permeate it. It just flows quickly through it, like a mountain or barren land, or barren land might actually absorb water but not fruit anything. But like hard, rugged, round ground is referred to as azaz. So does that kind of like, does that do anything for anybody? Usually, sometimes these kind of connections are obvious. Sometimes they're like, what the heck? How are those things connected? I think with womb and mercy, it's a little obvious sometimes. Some people, when I present it to them, like, oh, I don't get it, and then when I explain, like, oh, okay, obviously, yeah. But any thoughts here, just right off the bat? The idea of izzah, the idea of like strength, and even also the idea of honor in a way as well, is associated with this word aziz, izzah, being the infinitival form, right? If you have izzah, you have like honor, power, strength.
I hear a lot of dominance and grace within
Dominance and grace. Yeah, I
So
mean,
grace more to do with the Islam, and they have a king, and they have dominance, but they also have the grace to pardon, and they're dear to someone as well. I don't know that that's what it means, but maybe
hmm,
start to contemplate that a little more, Rachel, for Christians.
that actually reminds me of I think what Maha said in the group chat. How it's also they in Urdu you say Aziz the same way that we say Habib. It's interesting I don't think you say Habib in Urdu, but you say Aziz, which is interesting. But you say it in the same sense that we do in Arabic. You say it to like a dear person or something like that. So yeah, I think there's a sense of like grace, or comfort there. Um, the base meaning, actually, I should have maybe started with this, or the simple explanation that's usually given for what is Aziz. It means the person who defeats, or who conquers, or who overpowers and is never overpowered. So that's the basic meaning of Aziz. And then the explanation that's usually given um, for how it's related to Azaz, or hard ground, is because hard ground cannot be penetrated, right? Hard ground cannot be overcome, cannot be. Um, um, so I think this really opens up a question that I'd like to kind of. I'm curious what people think. How do you define strength, right? How do you define might and power? Well, I mean, power. See, once you start using too many synonyms, it gets a little tricky, right? Because power, in some sense, is different from strength, and English doesn't really help us here. Like I don't think there's really. I mean, I'm not too certain. I don't remember ever really looking into it. I think I remember looking into the etymology of strength, and I don't think I remember found anything other than it rhymes with length. Uh, and that's actually a good motto that I learned. If anybody's into fitness, strength through length. But anyway, um, um, there's an open hand, I think.
Assalamualaikum.
Alaikum salam.
I'm new to your class, so pardon me if I'm not
Oh,
flowing
please.
with the energy here.
No problem at all. The energy is, it really, honestly, it's not a class. Like I don't really, I try to throw tidbits of knowledge here and there, but I'm by no means an expert, and this is not a class. Yeah. It really, I would just love everyone to think of it as a free flowing conversation. I know that's difficult in a digital context, but khair inshallah.
So, Bismillah, as you were speaking, Omar, what came up, conjured up in me was the thought of, even before you said the word might or power or strength, as easy as an honor. So, I was thinking it's a very masculine sense, culturally and otherwise, associated with it, or the meaning or the feel of it. And I wondered about the masculine and feminine within that. As someone mentioned earlier, a gentler side, the grace. So I thought about Jamal and Jalal side of the name, the duality, and does it have both sense of the meaning? Because often it's also, I just thought when you said earlier on, it's usually associated with kings and leaders of some sort. Automatically, there's both the spiritual idea of active and receptive, and often culturally or otherwise has embodied as a masculine and feminine in terms of gender, I guess. So that's just what it came to me. I don't have a conclusion. It's more of just a thought as you invited me to share.
Yeah, no, of course. Open questions are definitely welcome. I think there's been a few that I've had myself, and I've kind of just recorded them, on the off chance that somebody listens to this, or I re-listen to it, and and find an answer. But even before I ever even came across this name or this root, and looked into it, I had a question myself of like, what is strength really? What does it mean to be strong? And I'm curious. I'm sure you guys have some thoughts here, but usually, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Can I jump in here, sorry?
Uh,
Like another said handle, just want to say one word. For me, strength is meaning, it's for me vulnerability. That's all I'll leave you with.
okay, that's
The
interesting.
idea of being strong is to be vulnerable, in touch, in tune with your embodiedness and self. And that for me captures by a sense of understanding one's vulnerability and owning it, not as a negative, but as a positive.
Yeah,
So
no,
just
I, I think that's very beautiful. I think that ties in very well. um,
I would also there because I think vulnerability just means not being defensive, let's say, right? And so vulnerability means that we're able to see what is because we're not being, let's say, I don't know, defensively offensive in a way. We're not expected. We're not in fight or flight mode. So in a sense, just to piggyback off of what Nasima said, it's almost like when I say the word Aziz, I see a pearl, or I see like something which is round, which is smooth, which cannot easily be broken or shattered, and it's a product of nature. And so, like for example, what are the forms of I mean, ultimately, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, right? He is the Aziz, the source of it, and it itself, right? And so, when we're able to surrender our nafs and see actually what is, the truly real, then we can begin to understand what this concept means, right? It's like that which persists, that which is the ground of reality in a way, and we can only begin to perceive that and be supported by that truly when we relax, right? And like Nasima said, become vulnerable. And so and also from that, right, we get so confused with our own inventions in the world we live in that we're not aware of the perfection built into the nature of this existence, you know, in the different forms that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has populated it with. And so for me, that's what it is. It's like, where are the pearls, you know, these perfect forms um, of Allah's, his sifat, right? The extension of his qualities, um, and how can we perceive those in existence?
mashallah, that's a beautiful answer, and I think that also ties in really well. And I think I can tie both of those things together, and the idea of hard ground as well. I'm just curious if there's any ideas here. Let me just also say,
So, can I add something or
of course, yes, of course.
could you go back to the part where you expanded on hard ground, please?
Yeah, no, I will go. Did you have any thoughts you wanted to add, or just that was just it?
Yeah, I just
I'm
want
gonna
to
go
read
back.
it.
Oh, you want to see it again? Oh, sorry. Um,
No, I want to add something as well. I'm just trying to. Okay, so I was thinking about like our conversation about like these things that can have opposite meanings, right? But I'll go back, I guess.
yeah.
I was thinking about how this is actually one of them. So, for example, if you say Azizi or Azizun li, I suppose that could work.
Mm-hmm.
That means dear to me, precious to me,
Right.
important to me, valuable to me.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you say Azizun ala,
Right.
that means difficult. And that's like, so it
Right.
says actually about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Azizun alayhi. لقد جاءكم رسول من أنفسكم عزيز عليه ما عنتم.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so there it's translated, it's difficult for him, whatever like harms him or is difficult upon him. But it's actually just Aziz. And so then here, if we, I don't know, I'm just also trying to like connect some dots about how like something that's difficult, how the same word can mean difficult and precious at the same time. And it brought me back to, I mean, what Nasima said was really interesting because I thought of how, so for example, someone commented that it's paired with the names of Jamal, but it is also paired often with the names of Jalal, like Allah latifun bi'ibadihi yarzuq man yasha wa huwa al-qawiyyu al-aziz. And then in the longest list of names, it comes Al-Aziz, Al-Jabbar, Al-Mutakabbir. So that's, those are like pretty much very Jalali names. And so then, if I'm thinking about power as power to move, then that really like brings it together for me. Like this name brings both of those powers together for me, and it brings also the grammatical forms together. And the way I see it is because Aziz, if we see as a masculine power, active power, then it is a power to, let's say, dominate or like, mighty in terms of being mighty, right? And like Al-Qawi al-Aziz, like Allah can penetrate hard ground, or Allah is not overpowered. So that's like the masculine one. And the other one would be Aziz as a precious, as in this would be like the receptive form of the grammatical verb, or not verb, the grammatical form. And that would be the feminine, which is the power to move, because you are so precious to somebody, because we do things, people who are really dear to us and really valuable to us, just because they are valuable to us, we do things for them. We are moved by their power in terms of their value, their being precious to us. So that I would say is like soft power, and that would be like, the hard ground or mighty, powerful, overcoming power is like the masculine power of like, or the if it is the active form of the verb, not verb, whatever it is. But yeah, that's all.
No, that's really interesting. I'm gonna challenge that a little bit, but that's really curious that you say that, or it's really interesting actually. One side note, the ayah that you mentioned, I did want to mention that actually when we were talking about the form, because that's a good example of how Aziz there doesn't have the sense of the active participle. It doesn't have the sense of fa'il or mu'izz, right? The doer. It has the sense of kabir, right? Because the ayah is saying that where you disagree, the things that you disagree upon as Muslims, or I don't know the exact translation of anittum actually, so someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the idea there is that where you disagree is aziz on the Prophet ﷺ. It's a great deal to him, the things that you dispute and disagree about, or resist might also be another translation there. So yeah, that's a good example of how aziz, that form fa'il, really has the meaning of like kabir or great. It has more the meaning of an adjective than a noun or an active doer kind of thing. The other thing I wanted to say was just in the same way that you see here when you click on the red words, you get a definition that's pulled from Lane's lexicon, which I can talk more about if anyone is curious. The goal with this app actually is also to add those features to the roots and then also to the forms as well. So right now it's not that feature is not there yet. So, but part of these conversations actually is to try and like find the best ways to, because there's no dictionary of roots, right? There's no, well, I mean there are some, but there's no English dictionary at least, and there are definitely not any apps where you can just click on a root and get a general idea of how the different words are tied together. So part of these discussions and these sessions really are kind of to refine or to really try and just come to like a sentence or a phrase that kind of captures everything, and then we can add that to the database, and then you can click on a root, and then you can see an entry that would be kind of developed and contributed by the Mashraba community for the root. There's also forms which I usually have hidden because these aren't really that great currently, because they're really just grammatical. What I'm working on is to allow you to see the actual grammatical form. So like when you click on a root and you see the different words, you could actually see all of the different right now the way it works is not the best. So like here it says ismul fa'il, right? So these are all words. I think the filter's on for the 99 names as well. So these are all words within the 99 names that have that active participle meaning. But again, these are just grammatical, so they're not morphological. Once the morphological feature is added, then it will be really cool, because then you can click on a word and you can find, dozens, hundreds, thousands of words that have the exact same form. That's a really great way to improve your Arabic and dive into morphology and stuff like that.
Blue dot means conjugated?
The blue dot is just my attempt at classifying different words in the lexicon with forms. So there's actually a bunch of them if you want to try playing around with the app at some point. But like some of them are grammatical, some of them are ontological. So like active participle, noun of essence, and then I also tried to classify words by whether they're abstract or concrete, whether they refer to like mental states. Yeah, I can go on. This was very experimental when I first came up with this, but inshallah it will be improved at some point, inshallah. But I just wanted to bring that up because these discussions aren't just talking for the sake of talking, which is great in and of itself, and I think we have beautiful reflections, but it's also for the further development of this application, inshallah, as a learning tool. Okay, so back to strength, mightiness, power. Any other thoughts before I kind of jump into respond to some of the people's ideas? So usually when I present this, and actually I think the first time
Let's raise their hand. Sorry, I don't know if you were able to see that.
no, it's really strange how it doesn't make noises sometimes. Yeah, alaikum assalam.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and for everyone. I think, I want to synthesize based on everything and share my view. I feel this sense of protection being inherent in Aziz, also that Abdul Azad, where I don't know if protection is the most accurate, but it's like this sense of something being cannot be harmed, cannot be penetrated, cannot be, so there is this sense of inherent protection, and in that sense Allah is Al-Aziz, Al-Qawi Al-Aziz, in the sense that God cannot be overpowered or harmed in any way, so there is also this sense of honor in it. And in the same way, when someone or somebody is the Azizun Alay, like in that verse, it's like it's out of it's also in the verse like Harisun Alaykum. It's this out of care that I feel like, okay, I can maybe see your vulnerabilities and I will stand up for you with knowledge of this vulnerability and not the other way around. So there is this sense of acknowledgement of the vulnerability as a space for common strength as well, as an empowering opportunity. So that's what I thought about it.
Jazakallah khair. No, I think we're getting with every reflection and contribution we're refining it more, inshallah. That's what it feels like. Yeah. Any other thoughts? So initially, when I remember thinking about this, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, before I ever even thought about the name Aziz, I was just thinking about the idea of strength and power and that kind of thing. I was teaching at an Islamic middle school, and it was a very strange job because there was no curriculum and they needed me kind of out of desperation. But I remember asking the kids the same question, like, what does it mean to be strong? And a lot of children, they weren't really children actually. It was a very strange school. I my classroom had everyone from it was a very small school, so I had people at the highest level, and then also people in the grade levels were about six grade levels basically. So very diverse group, very difficult to manage. But a lot of opinions were that to be strong was to move, to move something, right? It was to have an effect on some other people. It was to be powerful, right? It was to be able to beat anybody, um, or defeat anybody, or hurt people, or cause destruction. That was generally the consensus among most people. And I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, Zinira, but then you also said some stuff about like masculine versus feminine, which is curious, and I'd like to get to the bottom of that a little bit too. But I think for me, what I came to the conclusion of was that there's a difference between strength and power, right? Strength is, and I think this is in tune with what a lot of people were saying. I think the words that you guys used was actually very poignant, right? I heard vulnerability. I heard protection. Joshua, I think you were saying like to even be relaxed, right? And then, which reminded me of another name of Allah, Al-Halim. But I think that's essentially, the idea here is that to be strong really is to be unmovable, right? In Arabic we say العزيز هو الذي يغلب ولا يغلب, right? He's the one who conquers, right? The Aziz is the one who conquers but is never conquered, right? He overtakes but he's never overtaken, and that idea, I think, is the main thing. Because Allah can never be overtaken, and you can have somebody who's strong, right? So like another word in Arabic for that we might translate as strong is qawi, right? Which I would actually prefer to translate that as power, right? Because that, and even I think you can even kind of hear it in the sounds. The qaf usually has a very like punchy kind of like sound, right? So qawi to me is more powerful. It's more about movement, right? It's more about causing something to happen. Whereas aziz, the hard ground, it's your ability to resist, right? It's your ability to remain unfazed. And I think, when I was thinking about this was, maybe in my 20s or something like that. So, we always go through phases in life and we're always growing. But I think at that point in my life, that was something that was, really important to me, to understand what it meant to be strong, right? And that realization that to be strong is really to not be affected by the things that are around you, is your ability to resist, which is different from, because I think, especially maybe it's a Western thing. Actually, I don't know if it's a a symptom of growing up in the West, but maybe you're kind of infused with this idea that to be strong is to hurt other people, is to be able to affect other people, is to be able to tell other people what to do and move them around and control them, right? And I think that idea is not only limiting, but in many ways kind of toxic and poisonous, right? Because strength in a lot of ways is knowing yourself, I think, as Joshua was implying, right? And being vulnerable, in the sense that like you aren't afraid to be exposed, right? And Allah, of course, is not afraid to be of anything, right? It's nothing can overcome Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that kind of leads me to another thought, which is something that I'll also try to add to the Excel sheet that we have, which sorry, just and that's and I don't think it has been relevant until this name. I kind of wanted to do it earlier, but I think with this name it's the most relevant. So if we go to Corpus Quran here, I think this is maybe a good way to show it. But so often in the Quran you have the names of Allah are in there and they're often paired. So Aziz is paired most often with, does anybody know? Anyone want to take a guess while I look for this?
Ghaffar? I mean, there's a lot. There's Ghaffar, there's Rahim.
Yeah, I think I heard there's something like 80 something mentions of Aziz in the Quran, and somewhere around 70 of them, the majority of them, are all paired with one other name. Any other guesses?
Hakim?
Yes, Hakim, right? And the question is, the simple question is why, right? And the simple answer is that because there are many, like Aziz, as we said, is a term that's used for a leader, right, or a president or a chief or something like that. So there are many leaders who are not wise, right? And Hakim, if anyone wasn't aware, means to be wise. So that's one thought there, right? That Aziz is most often in the Quran tied to or paired with Hakim. Huwa al-Aziz al-Hakim, or Huwa Azizun Hakim. There's a few other co-locations too, a few other pairs. Qawi.
Can I just
Yeah, no,
respond on this?
of course, yes, please.
Yeah, so I was literally looking at the same exact page, and I just want to respond about what you said about power. I was just saying power like neutrally as the ability to move, not necessarily to move to do to harm. Like if someone who moves you that's aziz to you in the sense of being precious, like if a baby moves you, just them being adorable and lovable, moves you to like feed them or like care for them, right? That's power. That's soft power, like that's feminine power, just being to receive, they don't do anything. But yeah, I wasn't saying it in that sense. But then while I was looking at this exact page, I found that the names, and some people say these are not names because Allah doesn't actually say that he's muntaqim in like in and of himself, but it's more falsifa. But anyway, so every single place in the Quran that it says ذو انتقام, it is paired with aziz.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 4 mentions here. لهم عذاب شديد والله عزيز ذو انتقام ومن عاد فينتقم الله منه والله عزيز ذو انتقام فلا تحسبن الله مخلف وعده رسله إن الله عزيز ذو انتقام ومن يهد الله فما له من مضل أليس الله بعزيز ذو انتقام. So I thought that's a pretty powerful proof that actually it is a name of power, and even power to harm. To harm, obviously God has the right to do that, but I thought that was really interesting that every single place that God is associating himself with taking revenge over those who are doing evil, he's only using the name Aziz in the entire Quran. So I thought that resonated with what your kids said earlier.
Yeah, well, so I lots of ideas there. I have to start taking notes as people are talking because so many ideas come to me. But so the idea of like soft power, I think really where you're at, or the space where you're thinking really is kind of the limitation maybe of the English language, right? It's like we don't have a lot of very precise words to make distinctions between like moving and resisting, right? Like we don't really think in those terms a lot of times when we talk about strength and power. So the idea of like feminine power being like a soft power, being like I forgot the word that you used, but I think it was kind of in line with the idea of resisting or being unfazed or being a source of protection. And you reminded me about another point I was trying to make, which is like how we connect it to like the way we use the word colloquially sometimes, or even poetically, when we say Azizi or Azizunli, right? Like we say Azizi, it's not as common, and maybe we can make it more common, because everybody knows Habibi, right? But not a lot of people know Azizi, right? So you can start saying Azizi to your friends and make that a new trend. But I think the idea is, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name of whoever said it, but the idea of protection, right? So like we say Habibi because you love somebody so much, or because they're so loving, or whatever it is that you like about them. But we say Azizi in the same sense, right, as a term of endearment, because we're saying that person is like our protection. Like we know that person will never be overcome, or we feel that way at least, right? That no one can take that person's place. No one can move them, or no one can move them from where they are within our hearts. Is kind of a beautiful way to think about it. I'm gonna think more about that, like the feminine versus masculine strength power thing, because that's really really interesting. And inshallah, I want to incorporate some of these kind of features, because and I'll try to add it to the group chat later, but there's some interesting pairs when we start to, I mean, it's just kind of a cool question to ask when you're looking at the Quran, or really when you're looking at anything, right? It's just like, the technical word is collocation, right? So like, what word comes most often with this word? And like we said, Hakim, al-Hakim is the 90% of the time, or somewhere around there, is paired with Aziz. There's a few others, I'm forgetting them off the top of my head, but I think I can add them to the group, inshallah. And then Duntiqam, that's really interesting. So I if I'm not mistaken.
Raise your hand.
Oh yes, go ahead.
Raise your hand.
Oh, sorry, I'm talking too much. Go ahead, please. Whoever was first, or whoever wants to go. I don't know who was first.
Salam alaikum. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. Beautiful. But it was on the topic of the coupling of the names, and I was thinking about how like just the beautiful impact on like human psychology and like the impact on me as I read those names together. So just personally, the way I experience, for example, when Allah couples Aziz and Hakim, for example, like there's a verse I was coming back to, the verse like Shahidallah and then Allah's talking about like how he's like the malaika and all swear by Allah, like that there's no one worthy of worship except him. At the end, he's saying like Allah's gotten less, like he maintains creation in justice, and then he says at the end like Allah's and Aziz and Hakim. So when I was thinking about this as like, if somebody is in a space of, when I think about oppression, when I think about like injustice, when I think about like, and I need that reminder that Allah is Aziz, and then by coupling it with Hakim, that leads me to like tawakkul and sabr. So I was just thinking about like the beautiful wisdom of when I need to reflect on that name and what it's coupled with to lead me to confidence in like what I need to practice, which in this case is like trust or patience, patient perseverance. And then on the other side, when it's coupled with Rahim, I was just reading like sort of Shu'ara yesterday, and that there's a verse that gets repeated over and over and over again, where Allah's reminding us that He is Aziz Rahim, but it's after He talks about like we destroyed them, or like we drowned, some of them, and then He says, like, reminds us He's Aziz Rahim, and so then the impact for me is like, oh, Toba. So when I think about like whether I'm in a space of like feeling heavy because of oppression in the world, I need to I call upon those names, and I'm reminded that I need tawakkul and sabr. And then when I'm thinking about my own potential to oppress myself or others, and then Allah's reminding us of that that He's Aziz Rahim, then it invites Tawbah, because I'm just thinking about the power of those stories and human psychology and like what it invites. So I wanted to offer that as just sort of like a reflection on like how I experience the coupling of that name with some of the other names and the wisdom that I think Allah, gives us, that inspires us to show up in certain ways.
MashaAllah, Jazakallah khair. Yes, I think that ties well to Zinira's point about Azizun Dhuntiqam. There was another hand, I think. I don't hear the ping sometimes.
When I see it.
Yeah, I mean, if whenever.
There is Mr. Nasima right now. Did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. No worries. Maybe it was just maybe she clicked by accident, or maybe she's talking and we can't hear her. To Zanira's point, intiqam, I think is usually translated as like vengeful or revenge, right? So I think to me that kind of captures, Azizun Dhuntiqam kind of captures both, right? The one who Aziz being, the one who resists, and then Dhuntiqam being the one who moves, right? So the one being active, the one being, I don't want to say passive to describe Allah, but just covering both dimensions, right? The outward kind of dimension, and like the internal kind of like impenetrable kind of dimension. And Allah knows best. It reminds me of, I think I was saying Al-Halim. That's what I thought of when Joshua was speaking, and Al-Halim. We'll get to that name eventually, inshallah. But it's a beautiful name, and when I heard that the first time I heard the explanation of that name, it was with this simple little story of like there was a guy walking down a street, and he was being insulted by a bunch of different people, and they just kept insulting him as he was walking, and his response was, "You guys should stop because I'm approaching, my people, and if they hear you, they won't leave you. They won't leave you alone. They won't let you go for saying like I'm letting you go. I'm not gonna say anything." And that's how Halim was explained, right? It's like this high level of like patience and resistance, or being unfazed. So I think those also kind of tie together, and also.
Sorry, when you're done, I wanted to.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say the same form, Aziz, Halim, same grammatical form or morphological form.
I was just thinking in the beginning, I mentioned that there were two things I mentioned about how what struck me when I heard of Al-Aziz. And one of the things I mentioned was grace. And I was trying to figure out what is it that really kind of like, that idea.
Sorry, what was that? It cut.
When you mentioned, I mentioned grace in the beginning.
Oh, grace, right.
Aziz. And I said like a kingly grace, and I wasn't sure how to explain where that was coming from until you mentioned the clustering wisdom. That 80% of the time that it's paired with al-Hakim. I realize there is a graceful wisdom that is often invoked that in my mind, and I think that's probably the explanation I had in mind. I'm kind of going back just to justify what I had in mind, and kind of like rekindled when you mentioned that name. But even as you mentioned al-Halim as well, there's that someone who has capacity to, full ability, the means to really completely destroy someone, but it will go about it the best way, not destruction, but dealing with them. And the Hakim in that is an embodied grace that is manifested by the powerful. That's kind of what that sits with me when I think of the name.
Yeah, Zinira, so I'll let you go real quick. I just wanted to say, Azizi, like when we say it in Arabic, it really kind of has the kind of archaic or old English sense of like the way we would say your grace, right? Like if you say Azizi to somebody, it's not like Habibi exactly. I mean, it has a similar sense, but really it has more of a sense of like this dignified air of like, yeah, your grace. So it kind of reminded me of that when you were speaking.
Can I jump in there? I did have my hand out. It's just a quick question about Omar. There's a lot of discussion about thinking about. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what I meant to say. So the idea that being still is a movement, and I want to pose that is being still a movement, a form of movement too. You talk about resistance and not changing. So change, the other side, flip side of change, which is what I think I heard about Al-Azizi as something that moves or can move or affect in others. So there is the idea of moving and being unmovable still. So is there, so I just want to highlight that I'm grappling with that is stillness a strength, is a form of movement, form of resistance as well. You talked about in the current context, we think about Al-Azizi as resistance, as a solidarity as well. So anyway, just leave it with that.
Zinira, I don't want you to forget your point, but I think, yeah, I mean, this name is one of my favorites because I think it really starts to get you to think a bit, right? Because like the idea of strength being your ability to resist, and the idea of power being your ability to make changes or affect things, that's a pretty philosophical distinction, right? And not one that you come across very often. So I could be philosophizing it too much. Like I said, I kind of thought about this well before even coming across this name or looking into it very deeply. But yeah, I mean, those are interesting questions that you pose. I wonder if anybody has any ideas or any thoughts that they want to add to that. Zanera, do you have a hand raised up, or is that just
Yeah.
yeah?
So I just wanted to add about. So I just remembered something. It's insane because there's only 3 names in the Quran, as far as I can tell, where Allah speaks to a human being, introducing himself with that name, and that human being, of course, is Musa alayhi salam. And Allah says that one of them is this name. It's Musa, innahu ana Allahul Aziz al Hakim. And the other place he says, innani ana Allahu Rabbil Alameen. And I was thinking also about how when we end something, like when we end like a dhikr, not something, a dhikr or like a talk, we usually say, and it's also in an ayah from here, Subhana Rabbika Rabbil Izzati Amma Yasifun. And so those, like Rabbil Alameen, Al Aziz, Al Hakim, and these 3 names are like, how God introduces himself to Musa alayhi salam. And Rabbil Izza is like a merging of Rabbil Alameen and also Aziz. I thought that was interesting. The other thing that was about what you said about overpowering, and of course, no, specifically what you said about, I think Yaghlib, right? Yaghlib wa la yughlab.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting because I thought that is linked very clearly, very directly here in the Quran in this ayah where the Sahar, magicians are saying to Fir'aun. So basically, it's interesting that Musa alayhi salam speaks to Allah. Allah introduces himself to Musa as Al-Aziz, and then he's dealing with these people, right? Like he's supposed to be fighting or guiding these people. And what did they say? وَقَالُوا بِعِزَّةِ فِرْعَوْنَ إِنَّا لَنَحْنُ الْغَالِبُونَ. So Fir'aun, they're attributing Izzah and basically the manifestation of this name. And obviously Fir'aun's attributing himself as Rabbukum al-A'la. So it's so interesting to see how God is asserting these names because Fir'aun was trying to embody them. He was trying to be Aziz, and not just himself, but like these people were attributing Izzah to him and saying that we're going to be Ghalib because of Fir'aun. And they keep asking him as well. They keep asking like, will we have reward in kunna nahnu al-ghalibin? And then he says yes, of course. And then Allah goes ahead to show how he's actually Ghalib. And so I thought that was really interesting about Ghalaba specifically being linked to Izzah.
Yeah, I mean, if you try and put yourself in Musa's shoes, right? I'm sure he was terrified, right? Or at some level, scared of what was going on, and I'm sure, and we all know what it's like to be afraid. And when you're afraid or when you're uncertain, what do you want most? You want somebody on your side that's not going to be defeated, right? That's someone that's not going to move, right? Not going to you're a rock, like we say in English sometimes, right? Like in marriage, we hope that, like, as spouses, right, we are each other's rock, right? It's a common phrase, at least in the West, in America. I know we have a broad audience here, so that might not be, but I mean it ties very well here, right? Because we have Azaz, Ardun Azaz, right? Literally means hard ground, right? And we say Azizi, so all of these things kind of tie in together. To the other point before Zanera, it made me think of Surah Yasin, when Allah sent 2 messengers to the people, and then he says وَعَزَّزْنَا, or I think وَعَزَّزْنَا بِثَالِث, right? So, and then we strengthen them with a 3rd. So to me that kind of I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question exactly, or the points made. I think it's an open question, like what is, I don't think the case is closed on what strength is. I think, the idea that it's different from power, the idea that it's different from exerting force, being able to resist force, I think that's pretty solid, but we can definitely expand on that. I'm sure, and there are many tools that are available for this kind of thing. So, looking at the way names are paired, the names of Allah are paired in the Quran, I think you can study that for the rest of your life, and probably barely scratch the surface. I think there are some books. I don't know of any English books. If anybody does, that would be great. But it is something that I want to incorporate into the app, inshallah, to be able to just plug in a word and see how many, what are the most common pairs that you find. I'll try to share the list. I'll try to share the list for Al-Aziz in the group chat. I think it's pretty interesting. Like we said, I think out of 88, 70 something are Hakim. I think like one is Ra'uf and Rahim maybe, or something. I forget. But that's that's an endless supply of knowledge and wisdom right there. Just looking at one pair, right? Well, I mean, Aziz and Hakim is kind of obvious, right? We kind of said that, like, a lot of the Quran is rules and regulations and history and historical incidents. So wisdom and the strength and the unconquerability of Allah, for a lack of a better word, is very relevant in those contexts. But then those few contexts where Allah says, like, he's mighty and he's merciful, like, why does he say that? Why in that case does he say merciful? Why in this case does he say vengeful or dhuntiqam? I think Alim is maybe another one, and I think maybe there's one or two instances of Halim maybe. I'll share the full list, inshallah, when I get a chance.
Sorry, you mentioned any resources in English. I just came across this by chance. William Sheddick had mentioned this in one of the courses that was run by the Center. It's a book called The Repository Spirits. It's a commentary on the divine names, and it's by Ahmed Samad. I can post the picture in the group chat. But it's actually kind of, I think, would like beginners like topics we're discussing, the names of Allah, the attributes, and maybe we'll cover some of those more like ones that maybe we can't cover in the language alone from a data perspective, and include some commentary. So inshallah I'll post that, and it is in English and translated.
That's wonderful, mashallah. I mean, and yeah, and feel free to I try and keep these sessions and my preparation for it very minimal, because otherwise we're just gonna talk forever, and I don't want this to turn into like a talking head kind of thing, where we're in here for, I kind of want it to flow freely. But I love the fact that people are mentioning references of the Quran, and anything that any angles that we can come in, just to kind of understand this one topic better is definitely welcomed, inshallah. But the point actually that I was saying, I'm sure there are many books actually on the 99 names, and actually there's an open question, if anybody, I haven't had much time to look into it, but like, where do the 99 names come from? I don't think there's actually a hadith that has all 99 of them. So far, everything that we've gone through, I think like the first 20 or something, are all in the Quran, and most of them all in Surah Al-Hashr. But there's an interesting kind of like historical question of where these 99 names came from. But what I was saying was, specifically, I think there are some books in Arabic, some old classical texts that focus specifically on the ending of ayat in the Quran with the names of Allah, right? And how they're paired, and why Allah pairs this name instead of that name. So I think there are some books in Arabic on that, but I've never come across one in English. But yeah, my point was just that, like, yeah, just trying to understand, like, why one name is used in one context, is an endless well of wisdom and knowledge that one can dive into, for the rest of their lives. I hear a ding, so I think that means someone raised their hand.
Yeah. Yes, Assalamu alaikum. I was just intrigued by this, and I want to comment on it. As far as I understand, 99 is a symbolic signifier, because God's names are endless, and they're not only in Arabic. Like, God has names in all languages and in all, like, even non-human languages and etc. So 99 for me signifies the basically. It's a way of saying infinite names because 99 is almost 100 and 100 is completion, and 9 signifies expansiveness, so it's like expansive expansion in a way. So I just
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of times in Arabs, like classically, they would say like 70, and 70 actually means infinity or something like that. So yeah, there could be something there, but I'm sure there's some history to it. Um, yeah, I mean, it's actually kind of curious. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, subhanallah. I literally was gonna say Manaf, I think. I was gonna say something before him, but then I said it after him. But yeah, it makes more sense. So basically, the first thing is, for example, I have a teacher. He says that al-muntaqib is not a name of Allah, and he has like different, and he says there's different criteria for like names, like asma versus sifat. So for example, we could say that he says that um, Rab. I don't know if he said Rab is a name or like Khaliq, right? Khaliq is the name of Allah, but Khaliq kulli shay is also in the Quran, but that's not a name. It's a sifa because that's something that's something that can be attributed to God after He created everything. But Khaliq is something that God is even before He created anything, which obviously doesn't make any sense to me logically. But I think there's different what's it called criteria that people have, like scholars have, in terms of differentiating sifat versus asma. And so it's really interesting because I was just gonna say something about the 99. He said that Rasulullah didn't say that Allah only
Yes,
has
son.
99. He said that Allah has 99. That if you memorize them, then not memorize, sorry, ahsa. I think there's
Ahsaha.
difference in opinion about what that means. Dakhala al-jannah, whoever min ahsaha.
Yeah.
Whoever covers them or encompasses them, I guess, enters Jannah. So he said that's like a professor or a teacher telling the students, there's 5 pages. If you study them, then you're gonna be good for the exam. But that doesn't mean there's only 5 pages in the book.
Right. Yeah.
But it's so interesting because I was gonna say something, Omar, about what you said about the case isn't closed on what power means.
Yeah.
And so if you look at the first ayah, I think it's the first reference in the list of on the corpus. And subhanallah, it literally has the words 99 in them. إن هذا أخي له 99 نعجة ولي نعجة واحدة فقال اكفلنيها وعزني في الخطاب. So here there's a word about عزني في الخطاب. So that's interesting to me because of it's the same root as this, and it's a kind of soft power, like what we call like in internationally, like like international affairs, politics. It's a type of soft power, being able to speak in a way that can move others and that can change, like in terms of politics. It's really important. Like people
Oh, that's
hire dialectics, coaches, and whatnot to write them speeches that can move audiences to vote for them or to do whatever. So that's power. That's Aizza power.
that's really interesting. If you can share the Arabic text, I didn't follow exactly where you said it came from, but "Azani fil khitab" is very interesting. But it's I think it's a little bit of poetic license there, right? Because to me, yeah, sure, that does kind of mean, you moved me with your speech. But it also can kind of mean like you honored me, right? Or you made me feel safe, right? Because
No, sorry, I'm so sorry because it's basically, I don't know if you like, the situation was that someone came to Dawood alayhi salam and complained that his brother had 99 sheep or ewes, and he only had one, and he was azzahu fil khitab, and it's translated overpowered me in speech. And then but this was supposed to be like a sign for Dawood alayhi salam or something. And some people say it's because he had that many wives or something like that, but I don't know, that's debated. But yeah, it says overpowered me in speech. That means he was trying to take his thing. He wasn't trying to like be nice to him, or like they were having like an issue.
I see. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, أعزني في الخطاب. Yeah, I have to think about that a little. But to me, it sounds like a little bit poetic, right? It doesn't sound like normal usage. I think let me switch it to English here. I think there were some words here that Lane translated as whoops. What did I just do? Lane translated as can you guys still see the screen? Yeah. as overpower, but I think it like overcame here. So and so notice in that phrasing, right? He says a'azzani, right? Not azzani, right?
It
Like
is Azani. Sorry, there's no alif. It's only ain, zai,
oh, it's not an alif. Azzani, az azzani. Oh, that's a strange form because normally I think it would be like azzaza, right? Azzazani. Azzani is kind of strange. But anyway, here you have ista'zaza, right? Which is it has the istif'al form, which usually means like an attempt or trying, right? And that here in this context means overcome. So yeah, if you play with the forms, you might get a different meaning. But yeah, and yeah, it's an open conversation. I mean, let's keep the conversation going. Inshallah, I'll definitely keep thinking about this a bit more. Any other thoughts? The one thing I wanted to say was about the 99 names. Was like one thing I noticed, for example, is like, I think there is some controversy around whether these are all names of Allah or not. I think that's not disputed. I think most of the ones, everything that we've gone through so far is in the Quran. So if we come across anything controversial, that will be curious. I don't know which names are controversial and which are not. But one thing I found curious was that I think we've said it before, and I think I've heard other people say it as well, is that Ar-Rahman and Rahim are not two names, but they're one name. So then that would make this list 98, right? I don't know. This is a curious kind of thing I was thinking about. But yeah, I mean, we can leave that kind of as an open question. And I think I'll add another column to that Excel sheet for open questions, just so we don't forget.
I just wanted to clear something. It's just because of what you said about Azza. So in Urdu, we do say like Aziz. We don't say because the Azan didn't come, so we just say Aziz.
Yeah.
But then, actually, in Urdu, we didn't even originally have Za. Like the Za sound didn't exist. It's borrowed, it was borrowed along with Arabic words. So there's only a Ja. Like a lot of people who speak Hindi, they can only say Ja. They can't say Za.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Oops, weird for me because my name starts with a Za. But anyway, so there's something we say like at the beginning of like lectures or like talks. When you're talking to an audience, you'd say Maz, you wouldn't say Mu'azzaz, Hazarat, or like Khawati, which would mean like Mu'azzaz, like we would address the people that are present as Mu'azzaz, or like Mu'azzaz Sami'in, we say that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, same word in Arabic, mu'azzaz, yeah, same form as Muhammad, right? It's the intensive causal, I think is the better term, instead of passive participle. It's more like causative, right? The meme in the beginning of these words usually indicates like a cause. But yeah, we say mu'azzaz. It's not as common, but it is in Arabic, and we do use it. Yeah, very cool. I didn't think about those things before. And yeah, that brings up a good point. We can always kind of become we can always kind of take this conversation cross-linguistically. So I think it's too much for me to do Arabic and English and then other languages as well, because I'm gonna overwhelm myself and start talking too much. But if anybody wants to bring in other angles, we can look at etymology in English for certain words that are related, like where does the idea of strength come from in the English language? Is there a root that we can kind of chase, or an idea that we can kind of trace to kind of tie the different ideas of like strength and power and might and all these different synonyms. So that's there's so many different angles we can come at one idea, and that's what this space is for, inshallah. If there's no other thoughts, I mean, if there are, please feel free. Since Joshua's here, I'm remembering to look at the anagrams, but since
Josh is actually not here.
well, yeah, but since he was here, yeah, I'm remembering the fact that he likes the anagrams. And this is a biliteral root, right? So there's only 2 letters really. So there's no like 6 anagrams. So there's only 2. So it would be azza, right? And then the mirror form of it would be za'za'a, right? Which is not a common word, but it means movement in the simplest sense. So I haven't really gotten much into anagrams, or the relationship between anagrams. But it's an interesting thing to think about. I think there is, we talked a lot about movement here, whether, aziz or izza, strength, whether there's movement involved in that. And sometimes you kind of see, sometimes when you flip the letters in these biliteral roots, in these 2-letter roots, sometimes when you flip them, you get an opposite meaning. But sometimes opposite isn't really the best way to describe it. It's just like they're kind of related. They're not, so they're not necessarily opposites, but they're not exactly the same. It's tricky. It's hard to explain. But I think it's great food for thought. So if anybody is curious.
Looked it up. Yeah, I just looked it up, and it is actually the opposite. That's insane. So first of all, Zaza sounds really onomatopoeic to me.
Yeah.
It sounds like someone's, But then, so some of the meanings are convulse, but this is interesting. Destabilize, shake, unfix, unsettle, shakeable, which is like, the opposite of what we were talking about like being unshakable, unmoved. But subhanAllah, it also says rock. Rock is also one of the meanings.
Yeah, like I said.
As a verb.
That's
So
a.
that
Oh,
means
to rock. Oh, okay. I see. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Interesting. I'm not sure if it's been mentioned before, but it reminds me of Zalzala, which is a
zelzel.
earthquake word.
Yeah, the za in the beginning. I mean, you can hear even just in the sound. Za, it has a sense of movement in it already, right? We could talk about letter meanings for endlessly as well. But I think it's just a beautiful thing to kind of think about. And Arabic is really only unique because of the Quran, right? Like all languages have these sounds. I mean, they don't have all of these sounds, but most languages have the same sounds, and most of them have the same ideas. We frame them a little bit differently in every language, and that's kind of the beauty of language. But these ideas are really present everywhere, and za, you can hear that there's movement in it, but it's not necessarily always an opposite kind of thing, right? It's not necessarily opposites. I think often there's like a concrete and abstract kind of dichotomy sometimes, but again, it's a very like deep, like at this point in language, like you're really looking very, very deep, and the ideas become very heavy and hard to wield, and they require their own kind of time and space. And inshallah, maybe we can have another series on that kind of thing. One of my favorite anagrams is the one for ilm, actually, because if you flip the letters in ilm, you get amal, right, which is action, right? So knowledge and action are at this like almost unconscious, subconscious, cognitive level tied together. And if you flip the letters around even more, you get lamma, which means to shine, right? So I think all these meanings are kind of related. And then maybe when we get into Alim, the name of Allah, Alim, we can talk more about that, inshallah. But like I said, endless angles, infinite number of angles to kind of approach these ideas from. So feel free to come at it from anywhere that feels right, and then and feel free to keep the conversation going as well, in the chat or wherever. Anyone?
Session was really, really useful today. Today's session is actually really very comprehensive compared to everything else we've done before. In the beginning, I think it was very hard for us to know where to get the hook from and how to speak about lineage of Allah, but you really felt to me that much.
Well, yeah, inshallah. I mean, it really, the thanks go to the group and facilitating conversation, because I think that's really, that's the key to learning is having conversations, and that's how we ground ideas. And yeah, the few sessions before that, like I said, they were very intuitive ideas. So it's hard to ground intuitive ideas because they're just so ingrained in us, in a way. But yeah, no. Thanks again, Jazakallah khair, everyone, for joining. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share here or in the chat room, and I'll try to not forget to add those references that I mentioned earlier.